health politics in the United States has ended up learning a lot from general politics. And actually, across many countries now, as they get much more competitive in democratic elections, they also are learning from the United States. And that is, when you have frequent elections, what's discovered is that you can have advertising campaigns and messages on television that alter the outcome of the votes. That in fact, people who start up by saying, I don't support social insurance, end up for it. I don't support a candidate who would try to balance the French budget, suddenly do support the candidates. So campaigns have turned out to matter a great deal. But they're not easy to do, and it's not easy to educate the public for this. So one of the first things you learn when you're involved in more sophisticated politics as a student is that you start out by first believing that if you have the facts, the science, the evidence, you just go on television and radio and you inform everybody. And they thank you because they've learned the facts and the evidence. But it turns out in the United States, we have huge sources now of news, cable, online, social media. There are dozens of news sources for it. Many of them have their own view, their own bias, their interest in entertainment, their interest in having a sharp edge or view. And so, in fact, your views are not just instantly portrayed to the public. Also, and this is now true with global cable and everything else, if I'm not interested in hearing a view that doesn't correspond with mine, I have 100 channels I can listen to. I can watch my TV on the cable and never hear anybody who disagrees with me. And so people are in different news, different things. Some people are so interested in sports, they will never watch any newscast. And if you want them, you almost have to have some sports figure give a talk about, on a sports channel, why this is an important health issue. Also, in health policy, there is a belief, quite inaccurate, that the media exists as sort of a public health education arm. We have discovered ways that you can be healthy, have a better healthcare system, will inform you. In reality, the media, and now it's global, is a commercial enterprise owned by stockholders who turn out to make millions of dollars if people have what they call eyeballs. That is, people watch your shows. And advertising flows back and forth, not before the quality of the content or information, by whether or not people will watch. So as we try to get our health policy messages out, I've discovered, you'll discover, many of them are not interesting to many audiences. It's hard. You've heard all my professors. Can you imagine not anybody wanting to be every night listening to them on TV? But it turns out that's not true. A lot of us have messages that are not that interesting. And so we have to find a way to portray facts or science or evidence or points of view that hold an audience. And what's happened is, if you're watching a very broad television network or cable show in the United States, you discover that what's on is what viewers want to see. What's not on is often what viewers need to see. So in the United States, and there is less interest in global health issues than anybody studying health policy, anybody in the World Health Organization, global leaders. You would think every night there'd be some discussion of the health problems in Europe and Asia and Africa and the big threats that are there, and you can spend your life going from one channel to the other. There is no news. And even though people need to know, the people who produce it don't see it that way. So one of your tasks in health policy is, how can I make what I think is incredibly important interesting to viewers? Then one of the things that's happening, and for many of you, the younger you are, the better you are when you're a student, about this is newspapers are, in its current form, coming to an end. Your professor here likes to hold it in his hand, go through, feel it every morning, but it turns out my students get their news from the internet. the world in the future will get their news from principally cable television and the internet. And so the internet has a different format than newspapers. Cable has a different format than traditional news. And so in trying to communicate health policy issues, I want the public to see the importance of my issue. I have to learn a format of how it works on the internet and how it works on a more cable type channel where I might be sliced in talking about H1N1 and what we need to do between a mud wrestler and somebody just won a championship and they have a clip of me talking about H1N1 and they have a clip of that. It's a different world that we're in. So how do you even influence this in this kind of world? And one is you look for teachable moments. That is, events happen. Sometimes they're awful. For this, the tragic loss of a plane from Malaysia has started a worldwide discussion about what we do about plane safety. The tragic shooting of young people in schools has led to a discussion about mental health and what we do, and could we do a much greater job. These become teachable moments. People who would change the channel, want to go to the what's new on soccer, are watching discussions about what we should be offering kids in terms of if they're troubled, if they talk about suicide, if they talk about violence, like they never did before. And then also you create visible events. People do things in Washington. Michelle Obama has become the leader of how I can make walking an incredibly interesting media event. She does things there. She is in China. She's helping kids dance. We're having walks on cancer. And the walk on cancer, to no disrespect, doesn't cure cancer. It mobilizes people to be excited, to be interested in solving this very serious problem. Also, when you are a professor or a faculty member, you don't pay a lot of attention necessarily to op-eds or letters to the editor because you are a distinguished professor, you read books, you read scientific articles, but it turns out huge numbers of people think and form their opinions based on letters to the editor, op-eds, blogs that they listen to, and so you can really affect people by reaching out very, very differently. And then what I started out for, the US presidential elections have one category. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on paid advertising. It turns out that paid advertising can affect your feeling of Medicare. It can affect your feeling of the Affordable Care Act. It can affect your feeling of whether or not I'm going to get H1N1 vaccine. And so more and more groups have to realize that they have to reach out and buy ads that have their message. Also, again, I'm surrounded by young students all the time who say, Twitter, professor, stop what you're doing. Stop articles, Twitter. Use social media very different. You didn't change your Facebook page. And so you're able to reach out to audiences, and with the new media, you can target audiences. So families who may have a chronic illness, you may be able to get a list of targeting them and talking to them about how legislation really affects them. And you don't have to target 200 million people. You really target people who have a disease or a problem, who are older, who have kids with learning disabilities for this. And then a point I want to make is, and this again is sort of a technology transfer from presidential elections. It turns out the message, how you describe something, can affect how people receive it, how they think about it. Now, this, if I am a policy student, I object to 100%. Here's the facts, here's the evidence. Why should it matter, the phrase, how I describe it? Here's the evidence, here's the facts. But it turns out, for the general audience, that's not true. So quickly, for those of you who are not from other countries, the majority of Americans did not graduate college. Less than 1 in 5 have a graduate degree. So when we talk about public opinion, we are not talking about influencing students in graduate school. We're talking about reaching out to people who may be very, very intelligent, but the way they'll interpret information is very, very different because they haven't had all types of analytical and conceptual backgrounds for that. So here is one example. The U.S. Has a problem in its growing expenditures for Medicare, which is its health care program for retirees. To no surprise, more and more people are retiring in this country. They're older. We have a spectacular growth in technologies and drugs and treatments, and so there's a lot of pressure to sort of reduce these expenditures. If I say to the general public, I want to reduce these expenditures to improve the financial outlook of Medicare, this is a popular thing, and people will say, I don't like some of these discussions. I understand why you're trying to do this. I'll support you to do this. But I say, no, actually, I want to do the same thing. I just want to do it to reduce the federal deficit, which is still quite large in the United States. Most people say, stop. I don't want to have this discussion. This is wrong. And then I say, worst of all, I think we have to encourage businesses by having income tax cuts, and we'll have to make some cuts in this program to help encourage people to spend more money and invest. People are outraged about that. But actually, from a policy point of view, we're actually reducing the same dollars. We're paying for less in Medicare, whether or not it's to reduce its financial future, to have a lower budget deficit, or even a tax cut. I may not want to use it for that purpose. But if a person addresses an audience of millions of people and says, we have to do this only to keep this program viable financially in the future, you can garner really tough discussions, hard choices, things that people would rather not have, less coverage, tougher payments to hospitals and doctors. But we can't do that if it's for any other reason. So when you think about how you talk to people, what is the message? Why are you doing this? Is unbelievably important.